I'm sure you heard Joe Biden's remarks that we're we're the closest to nuclear war that we've ever been since 1962, since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Do you agree with that assessment? And how real is the danger of nuclear confrontation? And why do you think people are not taking that seriously enough?
The Cuban Missile Crisis. Let's put things in perspective. First of all, I think Russia in 1962 had four intercontinental ballistic missiles that had to be refueled, put up in Plesetsk, and I think one other place they could have launched them from. Um, with a single warhead, these missiles may or may not have worked. Um, um, and who knows where they would have landed. But just big warheads, so it would have gone boom somewhere. They also had a number of tactical nuclear weapons, including some they deployed into Cuba that could have been put on these SS-4, SS-5 missiles, and they could have taken out a handful of cities in the American southeast, south, and southeast. Their submarines had nuclear torpedoes that could have done damage to ships. But the bottom line is, if there was a nuclear conflict, um, the world would not have ended. It would have been a very, very bad time for a lot of Americans and a lot of Russians, a lot of Soviets, but the world wouldn't have ended because we didn't have sufficient quantities of weapons that would have brought about the global ending nuclear winter or radioactive clouds, etc. Today we have thousands, tens of thousands of not tens of but thousands of nuclear weapons. Um, and if they're used in a general exchange, it will be global ending. So the consequences of nuclear conflict are far greater today because more damage can be done. But the other thing is, back in during the Cuban Missile Crisis, I don't think there was the absolute prohibition against the use of nuclear weapons, meaning that back then people thought that you could fight and win a nuclear war. We didn't have the mutually assured destruction aspect of it yet. So there were Russian naval commanders who were very close to using nuclear torpedoes against U.S. ships when we were dropping depth charges on them. I don't think Americans understand how close the Russians came to using nuclear weapons. The Russians had a very not lax attitude, but a more liberal approach towards release of nuclear weapons in theater and a tactical nature. So if the U.S. had done an attack on Cuba, Russia would have responded with nuclear weapons, both in terms of hitting U.S. forces that are in the Cuba area and maybe even attacking bases in Florida and elsewhere. So that's a big deal because the U.S. was close to bombing Cuba, and there would have been a nuclear response, and then we would have responded nuclear, and it would have been a bad thing. Today, all major nuclear powers understand that nuclear war can't be won. At least we claim to understand that, and therefore should never be fought. We signed a statement earlier in the year saying exactly that with the five named nuclear powers. Um, there's a lot of rhetoric going around, a lot of irresponsible talk. A lot of it is derived from Western perceptions of what Vladimir Putin said when he ordered the initiation of the special military operation, that if NATO intervenes in Ukraine, that Russia will use all the means at its disposal to respond. And everyone went, nukes. Russia's threatening nukes. Maybe, but Russian nuclear doctrine doesn't allow the use of nuclear weapons because NATO intervened in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Russian nuclear doctrine only allows the use of nuclear weapons under two conditions. One, if Russia is attacked by nuclear weapons, and two, if conventional military power threatens the very survival of Russia. And that sort of means driving on Moscow, driving on St. Petersburg, decapitation strikes against the leadership. And that doesn't happen when NATO intervenes in Ukraine. So what was Russia talking about? Hypersonics, capabilities that the United States and the West don't have. The Kinzhal missile, I keep mispronouncing that, so any Russian speakers out there, forgive me. But it's a hypersonic missile. Russia has used it, and it's proven its point that there's nothing in the NATO arsenal that can stop it. But Russia has other hypersonics, some that have been declared, some I believe that haven't been declared. And these warheads can be used to take out NATO targets throughout the width and breadth of Europe. And this is what Russia meant, that they have the ability to hit the decision-making centers of NATO with non-nuclear capability. They didn't say that, but again, if you study Russian nuclear doctrine, you realize that Putin wasn't threatening the use of nuclear weapons at that point in time. But the West, of course, overreacted, and now the West talks about, well, what do we do if Russia nukes Ukraine? First of all, Russia will never nuke Ukraine. I'll just tell you right off. Russia will never drop a nuclear weapon on Ukraine. Ukraine is considered to be part of, the Russian sphere of influence. Much of Ukraine is considered to be part of Russia. So Russia is not going to nuke Russia. If Russia is going to use nuclear weapons, the last place they'd hit would be Kiev. They would hit London before they hit Kiev. They would hit Paris before they hit Kiev. They would hit Berlin before they hit Kiev. They're not going to bomb Ukraine. So anybody knowledgeable about this would never allow this conversation to continue, but the West is full of ignorant people who are trying to score propaganda points. So right off the bat, they say that Russia is irresponsible, threatening the use of nuclear weapons. Then the West has to get into a discussion. Well, what do we do if Russia nukes Ukraine? And then it is, well, we're not going to use nuclear weapons against Russia, but we will use conventional weapons in a devastating manner to destroy the Russian military, to destroy potentially even Putin himself. One of the options discussed, according to Newsweek, was a decapitation strike on the Kremlin, which is stupid because that triggers the dead hand, which releases Russian nuclear arms. But my point is, there's a lot of talk, and it makes it sound like the situation today is very dangerous. And indeed, it is dangerous because we have two nuclear powers where they're talking about the potential of nuclear conflict. But when you parse it down, the reality is neither Russia nor the United States want a nuclear conflict. And they are working to deconflict that aspect of it.